Welcome to Startup Warrior. This is the place to be if you're an entrepreneur. This is where we cover everything from how to build your company from that idea to landing that 6 to 7 figure investment from investors such as myself. And in this video, we're actually going to cover some of the more common mistakes that founders make when raising capital. But please consider subscribing to get the latest videos on improving your company. So I know I'm wearing a black shirt with a black background, but that's not going to stop us from getting to some of the most important points about pitching to investors. So a lot of founders who have self-funded a small business before told us that they know how to sell to their customers, but not to investors. Seed stage founders knew how to connect with angels, but they also had no clue what institutional investors were looking for. Even founders who had raised Series A didn't feel confident that they knew how to get to that next round done. So the insecurities that we heard on all of our calls actually cause founders to make decisions that they can stall their entire fundraising process altogether. Based on the interviews that I've had with founders over the last couple of years and with almost a decade of raising capital myself, I want to give you the 5 most critical mistakes that founders make when raising capital. So the first one is that the pitch deck templates won't get you funding. So most founders follow templates and stock deck advice instead of actually looking within and finding a way to tell their own unique story. So they assume that what got one company funded years ago will actually get them their startup funded as well. So they actually make their deck look exactly and sound exactly like everyone else's. So template decks lack story, build up, character, and with titles that simply say the market, the team, the opportunity, or the competition. Unfortunately, investors see these types of decks more often than not, and they can easily tune these out when they see the slides and information that they think they've seen 1,000 times over. So what's worse is that they'll even often bucket your company into a particular type and then make the wrong assumptions about your specific startup. So this makes them pass on your company because you didn't communicate your story and then instead turned it into a generic cookie cutter business that everybody else has seen before. The second one is that they send their deck to investors before it's even ready and actually hurt their chances of getting funding. So this is a common mistake for founders that get connected with investors in the process of actually asking for advice from friends and other founders. So with good intentions, these friends and founders will actually send your deck to investors that they know, and this can actually be very effective because a warm introduction are more likely to get you investor meetings. Sounds awesome, right? Not if the deck isn't ready yet. This actually usually, and typically it's not going to be ready for most founders that we come across. It's too often that we see a bad deck that's flying around between angels and VCs, which is ruining or slowing down their chances of a good company actually getting funded. So when a founder lets their deck out there before it's even ready, they aren't showing their business in the right light. And investors assume that the founder hasn't even thought about their business or the opportunity thoroughly enough when you show them a bad deck. I always like to say that it's like having mustard on your shirt in the middle of a meeting. So the reality is that people will talk about your startup and then send around your deck even if you don't know about it. So a bad version of a fundraising deck will actually spread everywhere and it will be talked about among the investors. And by the time the founder has perfected the deck and tries to send the investors they haven't even shared it with, the investors will already have passed on your opportunity because of the bad deck that they originally received. The third mistake is without an investor outreach strategy, you won't get the right investors. So many founders reach out to anyone and everyone who could actually potentially help find investors or even invest themselves. So they're actually open to any introduction and don't spend the time to understand the investor criteria before they're even introduced. And this spray and pray tactic leads to a mismatch between the investors that you pitch with and your company. For example, many seed round companies who are actually raising a few $100,000 reach out to big venture capitalists who don't invest in that size of deals or even invest in that type of company. So founders who talk to these investors without doing their proper due diligence can actually ruin their chances for future rounds of funding because a later stage firm saw that version of their story that becomes old before they even got to pitch to them. The next mistake is that the fundraising advice that you're getting isn't helping you. So founders tend to ask many people for advice on their deck and then end up churning through revisions after revision, and then in response to the late piece of feedback that they got, the advice that they get from multiple sources is often contradictory and based on a limited understanding of a founder's company itself. So often this advice actually comes from people who have, basically the wrong lens in what you're looking for. For example, they worked as a VC, but were investing in Series B companies, yet they're advising a seed company on how to do things. So this is also likely that any founder that you are getting advice from has only raised money or advised others to raise money a handful of times at most. So they actually have their own limited experience pitching investors, and what has worked for them might not work for you in the same way. And yet too often, former founders give key decisions like deck content or how much to raise to people who don't understand their business plans for future growth, and then the investor target. So blindly following advice on deck and deal structures will actually lead to a fragmented story, and often you'll regret about deal terms. So what you really need is advice that aligns with your type of business and what you should be accomplishing now. And the last thing is making things up about your business to appease investors that will hurt you later down on the road. So to raise money, some founders actually tell investors a story that they want to hear instead of actually a story that represents their current and future business. So they inflate their forecasts, or they represent the business as forecasting on a particular market, when in reality, they focus on many markets. And this is very important to remember. Your chances of raising money do not increase when you're trying to constantly appease the investors. Of course, founders just want to make investors happy, so they do this for a variety of reasons, including to secure an anchor investor or a lead investor, and finally get done with that fundraising, or because they think that the investor knows best. So even advice from investors should be filtered. And just because they have the money that you want doesn't mean that they know what's best for your business. And worse even is that you can often lose sight of what you believe in about your business, and then also how you plan on growing it. Founders that create a story for investors that isn't aligned with their business they're basically setting themselves up for failure. And they get a bad reputation from investors if they are found out, who then also tell other investors, so you essentially get blacklisted from there. And if you get blacklisted, you'll have a whole lot harder time actually getting money and getting to that next round. And they also have issues with their board later when the board actually asks why they haven't hit their numbers or were able to raise more capital. Over the last couple of years, my business partners and I have actually helped hundreds of startups raise money from all kinds of investors. And throughout that process, we've reviewed and iterated upon countless decks. So if you're actually looking for help on these matters, actually check out the link in the description. Thank you guys for watching. And if you like this video, you'll love other videos on this channel. So make sure to check them out. And again, consider subscribing so that you can get the latest videos on building your startup.